living in the hopeless, hungry side of town. I wear it for the prisoner who's a victim of his crimes, but was there because he's a victim of the times. I wear the black for those who never read or listened to the words that Jesus said. And the road to happiness through love and charity, why, you think he was talking straight to you and me? Well, we're doing mighty fine, I do suppose, in our street lightning cars and fancy clothes. But just so we're reminded of the ones who are held back, up front there ought to be a man in black. I wear it for the sick and the lonely old, for the reckless ones whose bad trip came in cold. I wear the black in mourning for the lives that could have been. Each week we lose 100 fine young men. And I wear it for the thousands who have died, believing that the Lord was on their side. I wear it for another 100,000 who have died, believing that we all were on their side. Well, there's things that never will be right, I know, and things need changing everywhere you go. But till we start to make a move to make a few things right, you'll never see me wear a suit of white. Oh, I'd love to wear a rainbow every day and tell the world that everything's okay. But I'll try to carry off a little darkness on my back. Still things are better, I'm the man in black.
Good morning. Welcome to First Unitarian Church of Cincinnati. My name is Patty Kelly, and I am your worship associate this morning. We are glad you're here, whether in person on this gorgeous fall day or at home drinking your coffee. We especially thank Don Keaton, our soloist today, who is here to share his wonderful voice and help us feel the spirit of Johnny Cash. It's particularly appropriate this morning, given Johnny Cash's solidarity with Native Americans, to acknowledge that our church is located on the ancestral lands of the Adena, Hopewell, Miamia, and Shawnee people. Our urban community welcomes all with love, supports learning and spiritual growth, serves our wider community, and works for justice, equity, and inclusion. During the service, you may hear about programs or other interesting items. If you'd like to learn more about these events, about our community, or about the Unitarian Universalist faith, please contact us at member-care@firstuu.com. In just a second, I will share some on-site accessibility information. For those of you who are joining us virtually, please take this moment to have some more coffee or do whatever you need to feel fully present in today's service. So for those of you who are joining us in person, please note there are listening devices in the back of the sanctuary, along with noise-canceling headphones and printed orders of service. If you would like something to occupy your hands during the service, feel free to pull out your knitting or draw a sketch. And there are also some focus items up in the VIP lounge here, if you like. If you need to leave the sanctuary at any point, know that you can still listen to the service out in the lobby. And that's also where you'll go to find our gendered restrooms. Gender-neutral restrooms can be found on our wheelchair-accessible second floor. Now, let us all be present together. We light our chalice this morning with words not from Johnny Cash, but from another famous bass baritone and civil rights champion, Paul Robeson. I shall take my voice wherever there are those who want to hear the melody of freedom, or the words that might inspire hope and courage in the face of despair and fear. My weapons are peaceful, for it is only by peace that peace can be attained. The song of freedom must prevail. Now please rise in body or spirit to join us in singing our vision song. The words will appear on the screen. it's time to greet our neighbors. Keep standing, keep standing. For those of us joining virtually, say hi in the chat. I think it's time to call us back together. It's hard not to want to keep on chatting, but we can do that after the service too at coffee hour. So let's come back together to sing a hymn. If you pull out the teal hymnal, it is number 1028, The Fire of Commitment.
Thank The Hardest Word. A Yom Kippur Story by Jacqueline Jules. Illustrated by Catherine Yanis Khan.
You know what I love about this church? It's that we don't have to be perfect. And sometimes mistakes happen. That was the story from last week. I will, in just a moment, after our children go to class, send out a link if you want to see the story from this week. It is the story of country. And I hope you do watch it because some great names are in there. So, you know what? Why don't we, our children, and anyone who'd like to join us, let's go out and do our lessons for today.
As we prepare for our offering today, please remember that the Share the Plate recipient for October is Shiloh Food Pantry. The pantry has been one of our church's major social justice programs for many years. In fact, First Church contributions now account for over 25% of the pantry's budget. Last year, we distributed over 250,000 pounds of food to over 1,200 households, and now more than 50 new households each month are asking us for help. The amount of donated food from other sources is shrinking. So to meet this increased demand, our October Share the Plate collection is critical. Please consider donating. Giving to First Church is easy. You can text the word GIVE to 513-717-7373. If you have access to our Breeze member system, you may click Give Now, or you can give online at firstuu.com. You can also write a check to First Unitarian Church of Cincinnati and mail it to 536 Linton Street, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45219. If you want to give to Shiloh Food Pantry, put Shiloh or Pantry in the memo line of your check. If this is your first time with us, please let the virtual plate or the physical plate, because we are now doing a physical offering plate, let it pass you by. Your presence is gift enough for our church. And as you listen to the offertory, be aware that our flowers today are given by the Flower Committee for those of us who are advocating through our imperfections.
I hear the train a-comin', it's rolling round the bend, and I ain't seen the sunshine since I don't know when. I'm stuck in Folsom's prison, and time keeps dragging on. But that train keeps a-rollin' on down to San Antonio. When I was just a baby, my mama told me, son, always be a good boy, don't ever play with guns. But I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. When I hear that whistle blowing, I hang my head and cry. I bet there's rich folks eating on a fancy dining car. They're probably drinking coffee and smoking big cigars. Well, I know I had it coming. I know I can't be free. But those people keep a moving, and that's what tortures me. Well, if they freed me from this prison, if that railroad train was mine, I bet I'd move it on a little further down the line, far from Folsom's prison. That's where I wanna stay. And I'd let that lonesome whistle blow my blues away. And I'd let that lonesome whistle blow my blues away.
I knew this would be a fun service. Now we will take a few moments to reflect on the joys and the sorrows our community and our world are experiencing. Instead of dropping stones in water, as we often do, let's simply sit in silence briefly as we reflect. You can meditate, pray, or simply contemplate how you as an individual and we as a community can live out our principles and show our love to all under both trying and joyous circumstances. You may close your eyes or not, as you wish. First, our hearts go out to the family of Carly Wise, who lost both her sister and her stepfather in the first week of October. We grieve for sufferers from natural disasters, from floods in Kentucky and Pakistan to hurricanes in Florida and Puerto Rico, as the earth groans under the strain of climate change. We mourn with families of the victims of the seemingly never-ending spate of mass shootings, including those of the unspeakable slaughter of preschoolers in Thailand, and the 19 mass shootings in the United States so far in the month of October, most recently in Raleigh. During this contentious campaign season, we hope for peace and for the energy to keep working towards a more perfect union. We rejoice with members who have celebrated recent family weddings and births of grandchildren. We welcome the coming of fall in all its glory, and we embrace the opportunity for invigorating walks and cozy nights of fellowship with friends and family. We give thanks for the First Church community and for our commitment to being together, staying together, and becoming an even more loving and welcoming place. Now today we are going to experience a very special message from Katie Price. Katie has been a member of First Church for about 4.5 years, and she attends with her son Colin, who is lighting our chalice today. Katie and Colin live in Frankfort, Kentucky. I just learned that today. She drives from Frankfort when she comes to visit. She's a member here. When she comes to join us, isn't that fabulous? Katie works as a public defender there. Katie grew up in a family that did not have a TV. Instead, her very musical father encouraged the family to listen to all types of music, and he played guitar and made up songs for them. Katie is inspired by Johnny Cash because his work is at the intersection of justice and music. Please welcome Katie Price.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. All right. So first of all, I'd just like to say thank you all for sharing this part of my faith journey with me. Music is very much how I experience the world, and so I've learned a lot about myself and faith through music, and the fact that you're letting me get up here and share that with you is so powerful and means a lot to me. So thank you for being so open to these, different topics. So I have struggled with Christianity my whole life. I grew up in a very Christian home. Jesus was embedded in every single thing we did. I didn't get regular children's books as a child. We just read the children's Bible over and over and over again, my entire childhood, no other stories. I can still pretty much read that 300-page book to you by memory. Jesus got brought into everything. We prayed over everything. My dad brought up God and Jesus so often that in high school, or college, my friends made a drinking game out of it when he called me on the phone because he just said Jesus so many times. It was effective. But as a result, it was absolutely the foundation of how I understood the world, how I understood morality, how I understood what it meant to hurt or to love or to be loved. And that was great in some ways. But in some ways, it was really harmful. And I think that a lot of people have had that experience of Christianity as well. I read on an online forum not too long ago someone who said that we're taught as young Christians that our inner critic is the voice of God. And that resonated with me so heavily because I understood exactly what they meant by that. That when I heard that inner voice who was telling me what was right or what was wrong, that inner voice was also telling me that I was overweight or stupid or unmotivated or just highly flawed in every way possible, or made me rethink every conversation I've ever had with every human all the time. And I don't know about you, but my inner critic can be a real jerk. And so I'm also being taught, or simultaneously being taught, God is love. God is love, God is love. You hear it all the time, God is love. I don't disagree with that sentiment. But when you're taught that your inner critic is God and that is love, what does that teach you about love? It means that to be loved is to be criticized. To be loved is to be put down. To be loved is to have no room for movement or to be flawed or imperfect. And so I realized that I was in a bit of an abusive relationship with God in my own head. And as I grew as a person and decided that I was going to love myself, ironically in a Jesuit university where I worked with a rabbi and really got into my faith journey, I was so broken by Christianity. I felt like it had really let me down, that everything that was wrong with me was all that anyone ever cared about, and that's what God cared about. And it took a lot for me to get out of that headspace, because the problem with being very pushed away from the foundation of who you are is you have to relearn the world. But also it's like, did I just, the last 20 years of my life, is everything I learned wrong? And there's a lot of struggle through that. It also created some problems with how I viewed myself. In Christianity, if I find out that I like women, for instance, is that a problem? Am I letting God down? Do I be true to myself? Do I have to pretend to be someone I'm not? I really, really like short skirts. Am I letting God down by what I wear? Am I letting God down, when I cuss like a sailor, which I do? Every inch of the world and being true to who I am I letting God down? What does it mean to be with God, to love God? What is God? And so this entire foundation of who I was kind of was crumbling. And that was really difficult for me, especially when I went home or was with my father, who brings up Jesus every 37 seconds. And was I lying to myself when I was nodding along? I was becoming I was compartmentalizing and being disingenuous to my own family. And that was really hard. And then I started to learn about Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash is a staple music icon in my household. So it's not like I was new to Johnny Cash, but as I was moving through social justice and realizing what I wanted to do with my life, Johnny Cash, when I was listening to the lyrics, I realized Johnny Cash was saying both the things that I understood about what it means to be a good person, what it means to stand next to people who need me to stand next to them and advocate for them, what it means to care about the environment and other people. But he was also incredibly religious. You cannot tell the story of Johnny Cash without talking about Christianity. It's not possible. I think my dad brings up Jesus a lot. I think Johnny Cash did more. He wrote an entire gospel movie, did the lyrics for it. He talks about Jesus in every other song. But you'll notice when you're listening to it, it doesn't feel like you're being preached to. It feels like someone's talking to you. And through Johnny Cash, I was able to find peace within myself about Christianity and what it means to be who I am in a genuine and real way, and what it means to continue to grow with the faith tradition I grew up with, but also with making room for who I really am. So I appreciate you sharing this journey with me. I think Johnny Cash is the true gospel of Jesus Christ. Gospel just means the telling of Jesus' life. And if you look at what he does, or what he did, I think there hasn't been a more important person in Christianity to really spread that message that I can think of, and I'll tell you why. Now, Johnny Cash, incredibly imperfect, to put it lightly. He was addicted to many, many substances, big fan of amphetamines. He was often an absent father. He cheated on his wife constantly. He accidentally started a forest fire one time. He trafficked in drugs from Mexico. He did he knocked out all the lights on the stage one night because he was just really high. He was a mess of a person, right? He was just doing the most. If you looked at him on paper, you would say to yourself that maybe that wasn't a good Christian. But the truth is, he's probably the best Christian of all time, in my mind. So here's my evidence for my theory that Johnny Cash is one of the best Christians of all time. So first, he was incredibly service-minded. He, as Patty brought up, he was an advocate for Native American rights. He frequently brought himself to places and wrote songs or entire albums about plights of different people. And that's one thing. But I think one amazing example of that is when he did his series of concerts in prisons. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to it, there's an album that he recorded entirely from prisons, and it is so powerful. You can hear the emotion in the crowd as he sings. It's just an incredible album. I really would encourage you to go listen to it. And our soloist did an amazing job of previewing that for you. But if you listen to the songs that he sang in this prison, he didn't go into this prison and saying, "I have repented. Look how great I'm doing. I don't do drugs anymore, and neither should you." He didn't go in there and say, "Oh, you did wrong, but you can do better." He didn't preach at them. He sang a song from their perspective. He sang many songs from their perspective. They felt validated. When you listen to the audio of that album, what you hear is, you can hear it in the cheering, you can hear it in the atmosphere, that there was an entire group of people that felt heard and felt understood. And he advocated for prisoners' rights his entire life. As a result of those concerts, people who had seen him would send him songs that they had written, and he would hire them on as songwriters and as musicians, and discovered musicians that way, and would advocate for their parole. And those are lots of action items that he did to make it better. But if you understand that as a Christian, he didn't go in there and talk about Jesus. He went in there and talked about their lives. And that, to me, is more about what Jesus did than any other preacher I've ever seen. If you think about some acts of Jesus, I know we all have different experiences of Christianity. Some of us have no experience with Christianity. But, Jesus was known for eating, he'd eat meals with tax collectors, which were considered criminals, and would also, he spent time with people that everybody else looked down on and thought were wrong and bad. When he was on the cross, he was next to two people who were also hanging for crimes. And he said, "You will be with me in paradise." Whether or not you believe in the Christian doctrine, think about what that means. What is he saying to everybody else? That these people that are convicted of crimes will be with me, are with me. And I think in a lot of ways, that's what Johnny Cash was doing in how he lived his life. And that's also incredibly powerful for me because I'm a public defender and I spend my whole job advocating for prisoners' rights. And so seeing the way Johnny Cash did it was in such a genuine way. I experienced lots of people advocating for prisoners' rights in my life and in different ways, but I very rarely see someone go in there and say, "Let me think from your perspective." And I think that is so godlike and so Christian-like, and that I find it so inspiring. Johnny Cash also lived Jesus' testimony and gospel by how he forgave. In 1981, he was in Jamaica, and he had a mansion or estate in Jamaica. It was Christmas. He and his family were sitting down for a nice Christmas meal, and they hear a ruckus, and in come robbers, and they say, "Give us everything." Put a gun to his son's head, and they go and they go through the house and take all the jewels and take all the stuff. And it was a really scary moment. But when Johnny Cash talked about it later, the men who had committed those crimes, they had been killed in police custody. And what he said about it was, when he referred to them, he said they were junkie boys who were shot down like dogs. And he said, "My only certainties are that I grieve for desperate young men and the societies that produce and suffer so many of them. And I felt that I knew those boys. We had a kinship, they and I. I knew how they thought. I knew how they needed. They were like me." Those men put a gun to his child's head. And his result, or his answer to that was, "I am also drug addicted. I know what that's like." He didn't say, well, they got what was coming to them. He grieved for them. And I can't think of anything more Christ-like than that. Another example of how his principles led him to the right answer was his stance on Vietnam. I was excited about the last few sermons ago when we talked a little bit about Vietnam, because I felt like it gave us a good kind of preview. Johnny Cash walked the line when it came to politics. That song was about not cheating on his wife, which he did not do successfully, by the way. But he was careful not to ever say anything that put him in one camp or the other. His listening base was very tended to be conservative, but depending on what he said, different people on different political sides of the spectrum claimed him at any given moment. And that's in some ways good business, right? But when it came to Vietnam, he was in a weird place, because he also came from a place where you support your president no matter what. No matter who the president is, you support the president. And that was the mentality that he had grown up with. So he had his own show, and Nixon had said something about the peaceful resolution of Vietnam, and Johnny Cash had gotten up on stage and said, "I support the president in finding a peaceful conclusion to this war." And of course, that got people all riled up. So Nixon, underestimating Johnny Cash, I'm pretty sure having never read any of the lyrics ever, asked Johnny Cash to come perform for him at the White House. He requested songs that were anti-welfare, there was an anti-welfare song that he wanted to hear. And Johnny Cash was just going to perform whatever the president wanted, because you support the president, right? Well, slightly before he was going to go do that, a woman who he was having an affair with, and we're just going to be honest about the flaws, right? Like, that's the whole point. Her son had died in Vietnam, and he had decided to go over to Vietnam with his wife and kind of figure out what was going on. And he was there, and it had a profound impact on him. So when he went to go do the White House concert, I know how I feel getting up here and telling you things that I think you might agree with, because we're Unitarians, we're all pretty open, right? This man was getting onto a stage to say to the President of the United States something other than what the president wanted to hear. And it changed the trajectory of his entire career afterward, but he chose what was right. When he got up there, he said, "We pray, Mr. President, that you can end this war in Vietnam sooner than you hope or think it can be done, and we hope and pray that our boys will be back home." He also wrote a bunch of songs to that effect. But he also got up on stage and sang a newish song called "What is Truth?" We can bring up the lyrics here. So I'll read this poem. I'll read it as a poem to you, because I can't do it like, not a soloist. The old man turned off the radio, said, "Where did all of the old songs go? Kids sure play funny music these days. They play it in the strangest ways. Said it looks to me like they've all gone wild. It was peaceful back when I was a child. Well, man," actually, let me pull this up so I can see, because there we go. "Well, man, could it be that the girls and boys are trying to be heard from above your noise, and the lonely voice of youth cries, 'What is truth?' A little boy of 3 sitting on the floor looks up and says, 'Daddy, what is war?' 'Son, that's when people fight and die.' The little boy of 3 says, 'Daddy, why?' A young man of 17 in Sunday school being taught the golden rule, and by the time another year has gone around, may be his turn to lay his life down. Can you blame the voice of youth for asking, 'What is truth?' A young man sitting on the witness stand. A man with a book says, 'Raise your hand. Repeat after me. I solemnly swear.' The man looked down at his long hair, and although the young man solemnly swore, nobody seems to hear anymore. It didn't really matter if the truth was there. It was the cut of his clothes and the length of his hair, and the lonely voice of youth cries, 'What is truth?' The young girl dancing to the latest beat has found new ways to move her feet. The young man speaking in the city square is trying to tell somebody that he cares. Yeah, the ones you're calling wild are going to be the leaders in a little while. This old world's wakened to a newborn day, and I solemnly swear that it'll be their way. You better help the voice of youth find what is truth." It took a lot of courage to get up on that stage and say that to Nixon, who had been waging a war on young people. Not much later than this, the kids that were protesting in Ohio were shot. He was doing a lot of anti-youth rhetoric. And Johnny Cash, who was considered a conservative talking head, despite the fact that no one had read the lyrics, just because he was a Christian, got up there and said to Nixon, "Why don't you support our kids? Why don't you be honest with them?" It was kind of prophetic, considering that not much later, Nixon would have some people break into a hotel and take a bunch of records. So he was onto the whole, there's a truth problem here. And I think about the acts of Jesus and how those compare. And when he was against them selling things outside the temple, when he had many moments where he was pushing back on the status quo to a degree where it caused a lot of stress and anxiety for governments, to a point where he was murdered because he was pushing back. And I think about what Johnny Cash did, and for me, that symbolizes more what Jesus was standing for than any other thing I had ever seen. Now, those are only 3 examples of how the life is a parallel, but I think it's important to point out that Johnny Cash never said, I'm going to live my life like Jesus. He said, I am imperfect. He wasn't saying, I am doing things the right way. He just lived his life. And I'm a firm believer that when we live our lives in a genuine way, and we're honest with one another about our flaws and how we fall short, that's when we're of the most service to one another. That when a weightlifter says to me and points at a box of heavy books, you can lift that box. I say, Madam, you are mistaken. I cannot. When someone who is in yoga with me on a weekly basis is also falling over when they do downward facing dog, who's, also finds their arms to be heavy with absolutely nothing in them, says to me, you can lift that box of heavy books, here's how. I believe that person. There's a lot to be gained by honesty with one another about our flaws and how we've struggled and being imperfect. In a lot of ways, our church is sitting in kind of a new day where we have to acknowledge our flaws. And it can be really uncomfortable when we're, teaching or being taught how to be more inclusive, how to be careful with your language or your ideas, what it means to not be ableist, what it means to not be racist or sexist or any of those things, right? And sometimes we have to have a moment where we're honest with ourselves and it's uncomfortable, and sometimes there's a little bit of shame there, and we're really quiet about our journeys. And I think that what we should be doing instead is be messy out loud and live our principles out loud and be flawed and acknowledge those flaws, but live our principles anyway. And I think that's a lot of what Johnny Cash did. I found a lot of peace through Johnny Cash. People, I'm still on a journey when it comes to Christianity. And as I'm navigating through life, trying to understand who I am in the world, who I am to my family, who my family is to everyone else, as they judge things that I feel I could never even tell them, I realize that it's not all for nothing, that Jesus had a lot of really cool stuff to say, and I don't have to follow each inch of it to be the thing that Jesus intended, which is to be an advocate for others, to be forgiving, to have grace, to push against the status quo. He said a lot of stuff about being there for the poor and a bunch of things that are just pretty solid lessons. And I'm not going to sit here and hold you hostage to them, but I do think that we can look at Johnny Cash and say, look how messy he was, but look how he lived his values, and we can live our values and be messy too. We might not be addicted to cocaine. Some of us are. A lot of us might be. I haven't been to coffee hour in a while. But we are imperfect. We do have our own flaws, and that is okay. And I think we need to put the shame away and say, let's change together. Let's lift this heavy box together and be honest about how much we've struggled. Thank you.
I keep a close watch on this heart of mine. I keep my eyes wide open all the time. I keep the ends out for the tie that binds. Because you're mine, I walk the line. I find it very, very easy to be true. I find myself alone when each day is through. Yes, I admit that I'm a fool for you. Because you're mine, I walk the line. As sure as night is dark and day is light, I keep you on my mind both day and night. And happiness I've known proves that it's right. Because you're mine, I walk the line. You've got a way to keep me on your side. You give me cause for love that I can't hide. For you I know I'd even try to turn the tide. Because you're mine, I walk the line. I keep a close watch on this heart of mine. I keep my eyes wide open all the time. I keep the ends out for the tie that binds. Because you're mine, I walk the line. Because you're mine, I walk the line. Because you're mine, I walk the line. Thank you.
As Katie has explained to us so eloquently, Johnny Cash took to heart the challenging commands of Jesus, which are often inconvenient for people in comfort and in power to hear. As Unitarian Universalists, we recognize the Bible as one of the 6 sources from which we draw wisdom and inspiration. So we close with words from the letter to the Hebrews, which was written in the second half of the 1st century. The authorship of Hebrews is unknown, but it is likely to have been a Jewish Christian, possibly an early Christian missionary or a follower of the Apostle Paul. So this is not Jesus speaking, but a follower who is encouraging people to live as Jesus instructed. Here's Hebrews chapter 13, verses 1 to 3. Keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown a hospitality to angels without knowing it. Continue to remember those in prison as if you were together with them in prison, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. And now we will extinguish the chalice by repeating the words on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again.